for 2023. But before we get to that segment, as you can tell, I am zooped up on my Zabars and Pete's coffee this morning, and we're ready to rock and roll on this Tuesday. We are bringing over to the show Charles Brandt, and I'll tell you what, we're talking about common sense here as it comes down to a weary taxpayer, you, me, and everybody else for that matter. The student debt schemes that the Obiden administration continues to stir. Well, you know what? At the end of the day, it's not right. It's not legal. Really? Yes, it's not. So what is ahead for the 2023 taxpayers? Are we going to be victimized yet again by the Biden administration or whoever is in office? I don't even know. Do you guys know? Well, we're going to be bringing over Charles Brandt. He's here right now to join us. Good morning, sir. How are you? Welcome to Common Sense America. It's first time meeting you. I'm so glad to have you.
Good morning, Eden. I'm doing great this morning. How about yourself?
I'm great. I'm riled up and ready to go. I was just looking at your Federalist article that you did back at the end of November. You know what? If you could, I know that you have an amazing background in law, that you are all about the courts. You're all about these items of what is ahead with the student loan debt. But could you break it down for the moms and dads out there for the kitchen table discussion? What is ahead with the student loan debacle and the scheme that Obiden is putting into and taking away from our money, our own money? Talk to me about that.
Well, I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm certainly no expert, but I am a law student, learning more every day. And I can say that a judge in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas did actually strike down and vacate the student loan forgiveness program. Mm-hmm. And over in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Mark Pittman's order, the one to which I just referred, is in the Fifth Circuit now. In the Eighth Circuit, that Court of Appeals actually stayed implementation of the plan without reaching the merits that Judge Pittman did. And from the Eighth Circuit, the Biden administration is appealing to the United States Supreme Court, where we will be hearing oral arguments in February and can expect a decision on June. Now, the big issue with respect to challenging this program in court it has to do with a doctrine called standing. Mm-hmm. Under Article 3 of the United States Constitution, the judicial power, that is the federal courts, mm-hmm. Is limited to cases or controversies arising under the laws of the United States. Mm-hmm. Cases and controversies have three central components to them. Mm-hmm. The first is that there is an injury in fact, that is, a litigant has a personal stake in the outcome of the litigation that is concrete and particularized, not a generalized grievance.
Okay.
And for that reason, taxpayers pretty much never have standing to sue, with some exceptions here or there.
Okay.
The second element is causation, the idea that the challenged conduct of the defendant is fairly traceable to the conduct alleged to be unlawful in court. And then the third is redressability, the notion that the courts will be able to redress or remedy the asserted harm, not merely speculatively,
okay.
But likely.
Okay.
So the Biden administration, in rather cynical fashion, has actually argued in court, has had the audacity to argue that no one has standing to challenge this program.
What?
And that the
that sounds like an authoritarian measure. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, come on. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm going to say that's authoritarian rule right there. Go ahead. I digress.
So, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head insofar as the president has invoked a 2003 act called the HEROES Act to justify this power grab.
Yes.
So this was passed on the onset of the Iraq War, mm-hmm. With what I imagine was an eye toward ensuring that our service members mm-hmm. would not be put in a worse off financial position because of their student debt obligations under the Higher Education Act.
Right.
And so it authorizes the Secretary of Education to waive or modify mm-hmm. certain requirements under the Higher Education Act that are directly in connection with a national emergency and that have inflicted direct economic hardship upon affected individuals. So as
oh, here we go. Here we go. I'm
so
reeling
as
in.
so as you can probably tell from the language I've just discussed, Congress was really contemplating specific relief for narrow subsets of borrowers, certainly not nationwide relief for millions on the basis of, say, a pandemic emergency. So the Biden administration's argument is basically something along the lines of this. Congress vested this authority in the secretary in 2003, and unbeknownst to Congress, and unbeknownst to really anyone in the entire universe, Congress had authorized nearly $400 billion in expense greater than the GDP, the annual GDP of Singapore, mind you, had authorized such an expense, 20 years down the line. It's an almost farcical argument on its face.
Yes.
Because the administration was not banking on the HEROES Act, in truth. They were banking on the limited capacity of the federal court system. And they, I think, truly believed that no one would have standing to challenge this. Now, Judge Mark Pittman in U.S. District Court for the District of Northern Texas found that two individuals did have standing, pursuant to a doctrine called the procedural injury doctrine, which we need not boggle ourselves down with. The Eighth Circuit, more critically, found that Missouri likely has standing to challenge the program because they have a quasi-public, quasi-private student loan financer that stands to lose revenue as a result, or likely stands to lose revenue as a result of this debt forgiveness program. And for that reason, the state itself is likely to suffer an injury, in fact, fairly traceable to the loan forgiveness program and likely to be redressed by favorable judicial judgment. So I should say, though, that with regard to states, there is something the Supreme Court has called a special solicitude with respect to standing. It's easier for states to establish standing than it is for you or me or taxpayers in general to establish standing, because they are sovereigns and they can assert semi-sovereign interests in injury to which can constitute an injury, in fact, for Article III purposes.
Okay. I have up here on the quote, in this country, quote, he admonished, and this is the judge in Texas, we are not ruled by an all-powerful executive with a pen and a phone. And you cited that in your Federalist article in November, end of November. And, that really struck me hard because, the rest of America is seeing this authoritarian manner in which Obiden continues to want to rule. He is not a king. He is not, China. He is not Venezuela. He is not Russia, but yet he is acting like that. So what do we do? Hey, I paid off my student loans by scraping my knees and working my tuchus off. And so I now have to pay more in taxes. I am a weary taxpayer, just like you said in the title of your article. We weary taxpayers can thank the legal doctrine for the death of Biden's student bailout scheme. It is a scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's what else he does in this administration and before and even after. So my question to you is, the HEROES Act, my husband served in Iraq. I saw many of my friends serve our nation and did not ask for anything. And the HEROES Act is, in fact, a HEROES Act. But this Ponzi scheme is not even close to an HEROES Act. So what is ahead for my dollar in 2023? What is ahead for, and let me ask two questions. What is ahead for the new college students, those who are going to be going to school next year? Are they going to be going in and saying, okay, we're sliding right through, we're going to get our degree, but we know Biden's going to be covering every aspect of it? Is that, in fact, really going to be happening next?
Well, to answer your first question as to taxpayers, it seems to me that if the Supreme Court finds that Missouri has standing, it's going to strike this program down, pursuant to a doctrine called the Major Questions Doctrine, which really was brought to the forefront of the Supreme Court's jurisprudence just last term in a case called West Virginia versus EPA that struck down an EPA attempt to regulate greenhouse gas emissions without the green light from Congress, invoking, very kind of vague ancillary provisions of what are called their organic statutes, the statutes under which these agencies function. The idea is that when an agency asserts a really profound authority over walks of social, political, or economic life, they really need to point to clear congressional authorization.
Right.
And so with respect to the EPA and in the West Virginia case, the court said, nope, that a vague ancillary provision of I believe it was the Clean Air Act is not going to cut it. We need Congress to really grapple with the issue and speak clearly on the matter because, a republic, as Justice Neil Gorsuch said in a concurrence, is inherently a thing of the people. And Congress, they is comprised of our elected representatives, and they serve at the mercy of voters at the end of the day. The same cannot be said for faceless bureaucrats in this vast administrative state, pretty much none of whom we even know or are particularly familiar with the exception of some higher level presidential appointees.
Right.
Now, with respect to taxpayers, hopefully the courts find that Missouri has standing. And if they do, it seems to me extremely likely that the court will strike the program down, either on a statutory ground, maybe under the APA, which is the Administrative Procedure Act. Judge Mark Pittman actually rejected that argument because he did not believe that the debt forgiveness program, or rather the authority of the secretary when exercised, is subject to what is called notice and comment procedures under the Administrative Procedure Act. It is likely, or it could be likely rather, that they will strike it down on constitutional grounds. The idea that this infringes the major questions doctrine, which is a means by which the court has started to police the boundaries of the separation of powers. That if Congress wants the president, under whom and pursuant to whose authority the agencies function and serve, to exercise these profound powers, they can delegate rulemaking authority there too, but they really have to speak clearly on the matter so it's clear that the people have made the decision ultimately. And not a faceless technocrat or the president of the United States himself. And what was your second question?
Sure. My second question really is the new generation of those who are going to be applying for college, going to college. My godson is already looking at colleges, and he's only a freshman. And I sit there and think about his generation and what's ahead for them. Do we give them handouts where they will never learn what it is, the value of $1, and just, the government will pay for that? But do they realize when the government pays for that, they are controlling you? They are going to be taking something else from you because of that. You never say the government, just like Ronald Reagan said, I'm paraphrasing, but when the government says we're here from you, you always run the other way because they're going to be taking something from you. And, as a veteran spouse, as my husband has served our nation for 23 plus years, we have seen what the VA, and I'm diverting for just a second, just to give this example, but we have seen what the VA has not done for my husband as he gave his life and nearly did not come home. And so I sit here and think about the next generation. And they're going to say, okay, we'll vote for Obiden. We'll vote for the next dictator because they're going to pay for our college education. But do they realize in the back of their heads, they're going to have to pay something back, and it's going to come back and it's going to haunt them. So that's my question. What do parents do with this next generation of college students? How can we educate this next generation? You being a law student, you have a phenomenal law career ahead of you. What do we say to them? How do we educate them so they can get out of this social mindset, the government is going to take care of me?
Well, I think there's two things. One is, the practicality that nothing in life is free. At the end of the day, when the government pays for something, it's going to have to cover that expenditure by one of two means. The first is taxation. And
keep going up.
the second is increased inflation, which is worse than taxation in the sense that there's less political accountability to be had. It's like a silent tax on middle and lower income Americans. I say that because, of course, they spend a greater proportion of their income on, groceries and toiletries, things used in daily life than, say, in Elon Musk, who's spending, probably far less of his income on those, percentage-wise on those types of items that we all need to, make it through daily life. The second is remind them, of course, that the Constitution is, as Randy Barnett, an originalist scholar at Georgetown Law Center says, it is the document that governs those who governs us. And I'm maybe paraphrasing or quoting here, I'm not quite positive, but, each elected official takes an oath to the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
And, I have it right here. I have my little pocket Constitution right here at the ready. The authorities our elected officials often claim, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter, are often actually not there. And we, the people, can hold them to account. The Constitution itself starts with, we the people of the United States.
I love that line. I love it. And so easily those elected officials, both new and who've been there, called term limits, forget about we the people that put them there. I've heard so many elected officials say, and in passing, I cannot wait to tell these people what to do. And I sit there and say, oh, you got it backwards, person. You got it completely backwards. We, the people of the United States, we put you in office. We tell you what to do. We hold you accountable. You are there at the service of the people, not at the service of your bank account and not at the service of anybody else but us.
Exactly right. I mean, I like to think of the Constitution as an employment contract.
Yes.
And it's a contract signed by essentially elected officials when they take their oath for office and they swear over the Bible that they will, protect and defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States. So it is, disconcerting that people on the right and the left, have an increasing disregard for this document, which I believe to be one of the most ingenious ever written in the history of the world. I will say that, as a law student, speaking, practically, I applied for the debt forgiveness because I was like, why not? If I'm going to pay for it in taxes anyway, might as well apply. Now, I'd rather it be struck down by the courts because it's just an egregious abuse of power. But, let's think, should a taxpayer really pay for my law degree? A law degree? Like, no, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous on its face.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the individuals who stand to benefit from this program are those who have gone to grad school, law school, medical school, you name it, and really don't need the help in the first place. And, rank and file taxpayers, truck drivers, plumbers, electricians, people who, by the way, oftentimes make more than those with, say, gender studies degrees from Harvard or even English degrees from Yale, should not have to foot the bill for what really is a luxury.
Exactly.
So I'd like to lay out that I indeed applied for the program as,
Thanks for being honest and candid about that.
because I'd have to pay for it via increased taxes to begin with. Now, again, I'd very much prefer that the court strike it down because it's just an egregious abuse of executive authority, in my view. And that, if indeed Missouri has standing, and if the Fifth Circuit finds that the two litigants in the case that Judge Pittman decided also have standing, this program really deserves to lose on the merits because it violates the separation of powers. If we look to the first page of the Constitution, again, this is just the first page, Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States.
Go figure. Checks and balances. That's what it's all about. Yes, Yes, say that one more time for my audience. Please say that one more time, because we need to be reminded of the powers of checks and balances, the powers of the legislative body, and not to put all of our hope in government, but to put our hope in the fact that we, the people, are more powerful than anybody. We, the people in our nation's backyard, we, the people at our kitchen tables, we, the people who make the decisions, are more powerful than any presidential speech or any Senate speech.
That's absolutely right. Again, all legislative powers here and granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Now, what Biden has essentially done here, and what the major questions doctrine seeks to prevent, is usurped, in my view, an inherently legislative power, that being of expenditure. I mean, this is an individual, President Biden, who at the flick of a pen is trying to spend about $400 billion without going through Congress. That has to be, one of the most, not the most, but one of the most egregious abuses of executive power in the history of our country.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's almost jaw-dropping, to tell you the truth.
Can you repeat that number one more time for all of us, just so it can sink in? You said 400 billion?
It stands to cost, I think, around 400 billion. Estimates vary, but again, that is over
that's our taxpayer dollars.
Well, eventually, right? We are going to pay for it in increased inflation, so devaluation of the currency, or are we going to pay for it in increased taxation? And when I say we, I oftentimes mean our children, our grandchildren, because our debt is in the 30 trillions now.
Yep.
It's going to take time to pay that off, and we have interest on that debt, mind you. And interest rates are actually increasing because the Federal Reserve needs to increase them to tamp down inflation. So it's kind of this vicious cycle of sorts where government spends and there is an instant, political gratification. But the tax man will eventually, come to the door. Isn't it what Clarence Clearwater calls the tax man in that song? What's that song called? A Fortunate One. He eventually comes knocking on the door, and the bill comes due, and it's probably going to be our kids or grandkids, just because of the sheer breadth of our national debt at this point in time.
Unless those 80,000 IRS agents come before that. I mean, come on, Charlie. Yeah. Come on. Right? That's happening. That they are spinning their wheels and they cannot wait to come to our doorstep. Who's next? Who's going to be the Grinch that stole Christmas?
There are simply not enough Jeff Bezoses and Elon Musks for the Democratic Party to fund their extravagant social agenda. Yes. The idea that they're going to go after, millionaire and billionaire cheapskates who are not paying their taxes, it's really farcical. They're going to go after middle class individuals, and I think predominantly middle class businesses.
Yeah.
And mind you, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos can afford to hire tax attorneys, well versed in the law, who can exploit every loophole left behind by Congress to really reduce their taxable income and to ensure that they're maximizing their disposable income. The rank and file Americans are not able to do the same. Yeah. And so you have when you get a letter from the IRS saying, wow, this balance is due, it's really scary.
Yes, it is.
It's a really scary thing.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And, what's especially scary is that, in today's age, we have, these administrative agencies, which essentially execute, all three forms of power designated to each respective branch of the Constitution. They make rules on the basis of, delegated rulemaking powers from Congress. That is, essentially a legislative power. They enforce those rules against private parties in the courts of law, and oftentimes in kind of their own specialized courts, say tax court. And they also will adjudicate cases or controversies within their jurisdiction, which is a form of the judicial power. And it was, James Madison who said that the culmination of the three powers, executive, judicial, and legislative, in the hands of one branch is, the very definition of tyranny. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said
Yeah.
that in the Federalist Papers. I'm not sure what specific one. I want to say Federalist number 47. I could be incorrect there, but Judge Mark Pittman cites to that actually in his order striking down this program. And it's very much true. Now, mind you, you can appeal IRS holdings. They have an internal appeals process, and then you can seek review in tax court. And you can also seek review in the United States Court of Appeals.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you might even be able to choose between tax court and a federal court, though I'd have to check. I believe the Internal Revenue Code for that, unless it's in some other statute.
Mm-hmm.
So there are checks, functionally speaking, to prevent agencies, or theoretically to prevent agencies from going rogue.
Mm-hmm.
But many, including many on today's Supreme Court, think that these checks are insufficient, and that we really have to take power that the court has essentially allowed to culminate in the executive branch of government, in this vast, bureaucracy,
Right.
and start returning it to the people and their elected representatives in the Congress, where our founders intended it to be in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I took the oath to serve at the pleasure of the president for the Trump administration. And my boss had it right. Let's drain that swamp, because that bureaucracy up there is out of control. It is mice after mice and gerbils after gerbils going around on a spinning wheel, trying to spin this nation out of control. But you know what? We, the people, it goes right back to it. We, the people of the United States, we are going to take this country back. Charles Brandt, follow him on Twitter at CharlieBrandt44. He is a Young Voices contributor. He is going to be making a phenomenal lawyer, and he wrote the article in the Federalist, which I have linked in our profile. Author of Weary Taxpayers Can Thank This Legal Doctrine for the Death of Biden, or I call him Obiden Student Bailout Scheme. Charles, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Thank you for being here. I want you back come the new year, because we're going to break even more down. I'm so glad for you. Thank you so much for all you do at Young Voices.
Happy holidays to you and your viewers, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.